I'm Peggy Roberts, Chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, TMCC, you may know it as. And our committee. Microphone. Oh.
Right there, speaking. And actually, Peggy, I'm introducing you.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce you. So let me start.
Okay. We'll start again.
Take two. Is that better? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Fall Warrant Review. My name is Rebecca Fricka. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Amherst. The League has organized tonight's meeting together with TMCC in order to acquaint town meeting members with the warrant articles that will come before town meeting in November. The League works to encourage informed voting at all levels, including local government. To that end, we sponsor candidate forums and publish Your Amherst Government and the Town Meeting Handbook. These publications are available at the Jones Library and on our website, which is www.lwvamherst.org. We also prepare the election guide before our local elections, and they represent you, which is a contact list of all town meeting members and local officials. We also sponsor a lot of meetings throughout the year, and I'm just going to mention one that's coming up tomorrow. There are flyers in the back. It's titled Working the Amherst Housing Puzzle, a community problem-solving forum. And the League is sponsoring this with the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, Valley Community Development Corporation, and the Unitarian Universalist Society of Amherst. Tonight's presenters will briefly describe the purpose of each warrant article, but not the arguments for or against. That discussion will take place when town meeting convenes. There will be time for brief questions after each speaker and a further question period at the end. We thank Amherst Media for recording tonight's program. Welcome to those of you watching from home. To our live audience, please check that your cell phones are turned off. Now, I would like to introduce Peggy Roberts, Chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, who will moderate tonight's meeting. Peggy.
Thank you. Our committee is elected by town meeting, and our job is to make town meeting function as well as possible as our legislative body. And informed voters are an essential part of good government, and much of our time is spent working to prepare town meeting members for town meeting. Tonight we'll introduce the articles coming before the special town meeting, which will begin Monday evening, November 6th at 7 in the evening. We hope to help you understand what each article proposes to do. Advocacy and debate will take place on the floor of town meeting. And tonight we'll be focused on trying to understand what the articles are all about. Articles will be presented tonight by someone who's been working with a board or committee. We have at least one town staff. Sponsors of petition will speak to theirs, and the time that has been allotted is mainly for explaining what the article is about, what it's trying to do. And in the allotted time that any of you have been given, maybe you'll have time for a few questions. At the end of all of the article presentations, there will be a question and answer period of about a half hour. So there's a chance for people to ask questions to really help people understand. So the first article is going to be Mary Lou Thielman here, who is chair of the Finance Committee. My goodness. That's noisy. And she's going to talk about Article 2. Article 1 is simply asking if there are reports to be made to town meeting, ones that have not been printed and sent out. So here tonight we will start with Article 2.
Article 2, can you hear me? Okay. Article 2 requests town meeting to move some free cash to the stabilization fund. The town's financial management policies and objective state that reserve should be from 5 to 15% of the general fund operating budget. Reserves also can exceed that percentage, and as you can see on the overhead, we are now at 16.5%. Town's cash reserves are placed in two separate funds. There's free cash and stabilization. The free cash is money the town does not spend during a given year for a variety of reasons. Vacancies sometimes aren't filled, or people are hired at a lower pay scale. Departments don't spend all their money on things that they thought they would. Incoming revenues sometimes are underestimated. So those are the kinds of things that give us some money at the end of the year. And every year that money that's, quote, left over is added to the money already in free cash. And as of July 1 this year, there was $5,162,239 in free cash certified by the state. The town's financial management policies also state that if free cash exceeds 5% of the operating budget, the excess may be transferred to the stabilization fund. Okay. The stabilization fund is the second part of town reserves. Town meeting is being requested to transfer the excess of $1,301,633 to the stabilization fund, which receives a higher interest rate than free cash as it's bundled with other funds to generate that extra interest. Although appropriation to both funds requires a simple majority of town meeting, free cash only requires a simple majority to take it out, but the stabilization fund requires 2/3 of town meeting members to withdraw it from stabilization. So as you see, transferring these funds from free cash to stabilization doesn't change the total reserves. The reserves together will be $12,757,589. Questions? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And now next we have Articles 3, 4, and 5 by Mr. Kravitz, who is our Director of Amherst Economic Development.
Hi, good evening. Thank you to the League of Women Voters.
Close to the microphone.
Oh. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee for inviting me to speak here this evening. I'm probably going to do something that's a little atypical. I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to take about the first 10 minutes to provide some background before getting into the articles. I think the 3 articles I'm talking about hopefully are fairly easy to understand, so I think it's important to give some background information. Alan, can we go to the next slide? So, so first things, there's been an informal working group consisting of myself, the planning director, health director, town manager, and members of the select board. And we've been having internal twice a month meetings since April to educate ourselves about this issue. We've participated in more than a dozen public hearings, meetings, and information session. We've provided testimony and advocated for legislative changes to make municipal implementation easier. And we've presented to various groups, boards, and committees to raise public awareness. Next, please. hopefully you can see this slide. If not, this is also available on the website down below, amherstma.gov/marijuana. This is the reason that we're talking about it here at the special town meeting and not the annual town meeting. There are 3 key dates. I don't know if you could hit it 3 times. The first is March 15th. That's when the Cannabis Control Commission is required to issue regulations. Currently, there are no regulations. They're anticipating draft regulations by January. The second is when the Cannabis Control Commission is going to start accepting applications, which is April 1st. And the third is our annual town meeting date, which is scheduled for April 23rd. Point being that if we wait until our next town meeting, it'll be too late. And that's because the law says that when the Cannabis Control Commission receives an application, they will look at the location, look at the municipality's current zoning as of the date of the application to determine if it's an appropriate location. Next, please. So a little bit of history, just to give folks a sense statewide. These are the 12 medical marijuana dispensaries that are currently in operation throughout the state. You'll notice there's only one in Western Mass. That's over the bridge in Northampton. Next, please. This is kind of hard to read, but what it's meant to demonstrate is that there are a lot more that have applied for licenses that are actually operating. The purple ones are applied, and sort of the yellow areas are the ones that are actually operating. And if you go to the next slide, this is a close-up of the Pioneer Valley. There are a total of, I think there was 16 potentially in the Pioneer Valley, and 4 in Amherst. The only other community with more is Holyoke, which has 5 applicants in the process. Next, please. So really quickly, and there are more detailed maps online, and hopefully you received in your packets, but the 4 proposed medical marijuana operations in Amherst, 1 is on Meadow Street, 3 are on University Drive. All of them have their provisional certificates of registration from the state, and 2 of them have special permits from our local zoning board of appeals to operate. Currently, none of them have host community agreements, which is a requirement before they open. So the expectation is that at least 1 will probably be operating by the spring, but currently none are. Next, please. All right, so now we get to recreational marijuana. Just a quick graph. Statewide, the initiative passed 54% to 46%. In Amherst, that was significantly larger, 74% to 26%. I think this slide is important because it demonstrates marijuana, adult use recreational marijuana is legal in Massachusetts, and the question before us now is how do we implement the law in a safe and responsible manner? So just a couple of things about the law. It legalized adult recreational use for people who are 21 or over as of December 15th, 2016. People can grow marijuana plants in their home, up to 12 per household. It also created a regulatory structure, which was the Cannabis Control Commission, a tax structure, created the timeline I showed you earlier, which was delayed in December for 6 months. And then the legislature this summer made some additional amendments, not really any which are pertinent to the discussion of the Warrant article, so I'll stick to that. So the first article is Article 3, and that's a local option retail marijuana excise tax. This is just like the meals tax and the room tax that Amherst already has. In this case, if somebody purchases recreational marijuana from a location in Amherst, they would be charged an additional 3% tax, which would come back to the town to pay for municipal services, such as public health, marijuana education and awareness, administrative costs, emergency services, and enforcement. So the second one is a limitation on the number of recreational marijuana retail establishments. The limitation is 8, so that's 8 or fewer of these in Amherst if this was adopted. A little bit of background on this: the law says that you have to go to a ballot question if you limit it below either the number of registered marijuana dispensaries, again, there are 4 of those, or 20% of the off-premises alcohol licenses that are issued. The town has issued 11 currently, so 20% would be somewhere between 2 and 3. So that's important to note. If town meeting makes an amendment below 4, it may have to go to a ballot question in order to ratify that limitation. The other thing I want to note is that we were advised by town council and the attorney general's office to include the limitation both in the general bylaw and the zoning bylaw. So you'll see this coming up again when we talk about Article 6. And we will do our best to keep the limitations the same in both articles. Otherwise, we could get really confused. Thank you. Article 5 is prohibition on public consumption of marijuana and tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. Currently, smoking marijuana is already prohibited in public places in the workplace because of our Board of Health regulations against smoking. They define smoking as the lighting of tobacco or non-tobacco product designed to be combusted and inhaled. So that includes marijuana. Can't smoke now. This would cover other ways of consuming marijuana, primarily edibles. For folks who aren't aware, you can put marijuana in food products and eat it just about anywhere. There's no smell, or not as much smell. It would authorize criminal and non-criminal penalties, and there's probably going to be about 12 clicks before the next one, but I'll just go through. It bans consumption on streets, sidewalks, parks, playgrounds, recreation areas, and school grounds, among a number of other locations, beaches, etc. And then the last thing it does is authorizes criminal and non-criminal penalties for violations. So those are Articles 3, 4, and 5. I think I have some time, so I'm happy to answer questions now. I'll also stick around for the question and answer period, but if there are any right now. Yes.
I'm wondering how you enforce the.
Where's the microscope?
I mean, if someone's in front of Antonio's eating some pizza, maybe there's some stuff in it you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that some of the thinking was that in certain cases, and we will know more once the Cannabis Control Commission regulations come out on labeling, but for example, you can have soda or drinks that probably would have to, I'm imagining they'll require some sort of sticker on it that has a marijuana leaf and says contains THC or marijuana. So if it's obvious, then it may be enforceable. But I think it's also about the message that, hey, we really don't want this type of behavior in our public areas.
So basically,
Wait for the microscope. Yeah.
so you named a lot of places where it cannot be used. So does that mean you can only use it at home?
Private residences are the primary place. The law does allow for on-site consumption. Our current understanding is that it is not allowed until it has been approved by the voters of the municipality. So you could have a cafe where you could buy marijuana and consume it there. Currently, that's not allowed. There is debate, I will say, on whether or not it says you need to vote to ban on-site consumption or to allow it. We think you need a vote to allow it, and it's banned otherwise. But yeah, primarily residences.
Okay.
Any other questions?
What does it say about marijuana consumption in vehicles?
So It remains illegal to drive impaired, no matter what the drug or alcohol-induced impairment is. So the law does not change that. It does allow for the possession of, believe it's up to 1 ounce in a secured location away from the driver for transportation purposes, but still illegal to drive under the influence of marijuana.
Any, excuse me, any analogy to the open container law? So that's mostly what you just said, I suppose.
I think that's the prohibition on public consumption.
So I'm just wondering about all, like brownie, all the food that marijuana could be placed in, and some, marijuana bakery that's probably going to open up. So then it would be illegal to consume those kinds of products in your car? Like you can buy the stuff and maybe eat it on the premises or eat it at home? Is that, or we don't know yet?
I don't think you would be, so they would have to be licensed, first of all, any bakery that does that. If you were to consume it there, they would then also need to be licensed for on-premises consumption. Yes, my understanding is you wouldn't be able to go back to your car to eat it. I don't know what the answer is if you're sitting in the back seat and you have no intention of driving, whether or not that might be illegal. Yeah, I don't know.
It's going to be interesting.
You sleep in your car.
So in terms of penalty for on-site consumption, or do we have any sort of a dollar amount set? Is it just going to be like a ticket or a fine? Is it the equivalent of, I'm just thinking like all this is totally similar to alcohol consumption, right? It makes sense. Like you can't buy off-site alcohol and go and drink it out on the street. But I don't know what the necessary law and penalty for that is, but do we have like a dollar amount set? Is it
For public consumption?
Yeah, like if you have a public consumption.
I believe it's $300 up to $300.
300 too, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it'd be 300 for that. And then I think that's the only question.
Thank you.
Are there plans for establishments on the university or Amherst College or Hampshire College properties for medical or recreational marijuana? And if so, or if those come to pass, would they be taxed by the town of Amherst?
So I'll start by saying I think those are questions for UMass and Amherst College and Hampshire College to answer. My understanding is that it is still a Class 1 substance under federal law, and that any type of action like that would result in a loss of federal funding. I am not aware of any plans to locate any of those facilities on higher education campuses.
I remember my other question. So I'm just trying to understand why we're limiting the number of licenses from 11 to 8. Because you could award only 8 permits, but why would we take them away? Why would we take away licenses options? Like it seems counterintuitive. It seems like we would want to allow to have the maximum amount allowable and then add them in as we need them, as opposed to having to re-put the licenses back in. I just worry that, I worry that we're worried that we're limiting ourselves, and I understand that there was some information based on how it was zoned and where it could actually, how many could we physically fit inside of our town. So I think that if you think you can only fit 8, I don't know why we need to reduce it, and you would only just approve 8 licenses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so currently there is no limitation.
It says 11 licenses, or that's for
I don't know what you're
alcohol?
looking at.
Oh, that's for alcohol consumption. So you're making 8. So how did they determine 11 then for the alcohol licenses?
Yeah, there's a state formula for determining the number of alcohol licenses. I'll give you some insight into it. I think it's hard to know what the right number is. We
Right.
don't know what the market size is. It's a totally new industry. But some of the thinking was that if we limit it to the current number of medical marijuana dispensaries,
Right.
that essentially creates a monopoly for
Right.
the medical folks to convert. We won't let any new players into the market.
Right.
The other thinking was that town meeting is within the scope of the article to lower that number, but not to raise it. So we thought that, realistically, if we had 4 medical shops that were interested, maybe the recreational market would be about 8. So we thought 8 would be a higher end and it can be lowered. But yeah, I don't
So
think there's
you-
anything magic about the number 8.
You just thought about, because it looks like you did that based on what was actually available in terms of physical space to put them in. Because I was just trying to, I mean, that would make sense to me. I'm just trying to understand your logic around deciding on 8 and not 12 or not. So,
Or 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a discussion, and the feeling was it should be higher than 4, but how much higher wasn't clear.
Okay, one more question, I think.
Excuse me, this isn't a question. I think it's a response to a question. I'm Chris Brestrup, Planning Director, and I don't think we really know how many could physically fit in Amherst. There's a requirement that they be 300 feet away from each other, and they have to be 300 feet from schools and churches and libraries and things like that. But we really don't know how many would actually physically fit in the town.
All right, and now, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to hear some more articles about marijuana. And Rob Croner, Chair of the Zoning Subcommittee, is going to talk about 2 marijuana and 2 other
Sorry.
zoning planning.
So you've heard that marijuana sales will be legal soon. We need to find a place to put them in town. Any legal use in town has to fit within our use chart, which explains or describes where in town each kind of use can be located and what the conditions are for that use. Right now, there is no use that is a good match for recreational marijuana sales in our use chart. So we need to create one, and that's what Article 6 would do. It does that by basically duplicating the permitting standards for medical marijuana that already exist. Medical marijuana sales are allowed in most of the business zones. It would duplicate that for recreational marijuana, with the exception of the office park zone. And it would duplicate or adapt the existing standards and conditions for medical marijuana sales so that it also accommodates recreational marijuana sales. The current standards and conditions for medical marijuana include references only to medical. We're dropping references that don't include retail. We're adding references to retail sales where appropriate. We're cleaning up some language that is no longer useful. For instance, there's language about signage pertaining to medical marijuana that's not really useful anymore, not more really relevant when you can also have recreational sales. So Article 6 creates a framework, a place to put retailers of recreational marijuana. And that would be in the business zones. And it would use the existing standards and conditions for medical marijuana, which limit establishments, as was noted earlier. It puts a 300-foot buffer around residential uses, a 300-foot buffer between each instance of a marijuana use, and a 300-foot buffer around other kinds of uses like libraries. So even though most of the business zones could accommodate a marijuana use, not all parcels in every business zone qualifies under the conditions. So there aren't actually that many parcels. There's an estimated 33 parcels that currently could accommodate a marijuana use. And so as a result, the planning board's motion will be a little different than what is listed in the warrant. We are going to propose that in addition to the standards and conditions that currently exist that prohibit marijuana sales from mixed-use buildings. So marijuana sales there's a buffer of 300 feet around residential uses, except for mixed-use buildings. So you can be right next to a mixed-use building. Except for residential uses in mixed-use buildings. So there is no buffer around a mixed-use building. We are proposing to take a little step further and allow marijuana sales inside of mixed-use buildings if a permit is granted. And our Article 6 will also mirror the previous select board article capping the number of the total number of retailers in town. Whatever number is decided by Article 4 will be duplicated in Article 6. And the second marijuana-related article that we have is a temporary moratorium on any new retail recreational sales. The way the article is written, there would be no conflict in adopting both. Town meeting might want to adopt both. What the moratorium does is prohibit any licensing until the end of 2018. As Jeff said, right now it's expected that licenses will be granted on June 1st of 2018. The moratorium would allow you to delay that until the end of December 2018. We don't necessarily need to have a moratorium if we have a use category for recreational marijuana, but you might want to adopt one anyways just to put the brakes on. I will stop there with the marijuana ones if people have questions.
You said in your motion that you'll duplicate whatever is said in the previous article about the number of retail establishments. What if that article is defeated? What will happen to this article? Article 6.
If that article is defeated, then we will move to strike that line in our article from our article. In which case there would be no cap. It would be limited by the number of parcels that are eligible.
I'm just wondering about these locations, like the one on Triangle Street, isn't that awfully close to the high school?
It may be, but I
still meets
I gather
the-
it's at least 300 feet away.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I have a question about the memorandum. There's some confusing language that says that the medical marijuana facilities will be able to convert to a recreational even during the memorandum. So, because I'm just not in support of delaying the process, because I think that we're going to need to bring the revenue in order to enforce it, and I also think that people are going to go buy it other places, and we should take advantage of that. But I'm just curious if you could explain that language to me and saying, because it almost seems like it gives an unfair advantage though I support it, it gives an unfair advantage to the medical places that could eventually convert to recreational during that memorandum period and start, taking a hold of the market in essence. So can you explain that to me?
I will try, and hopefully I'll get some help.
Do you know what I'm referring to? It
Yes.
says in the language.
So the question I believe is, the situation is that an existing medical marijuana registrant
Right.
is allowed to convert their application to a recreational
Right.
use. The moratorium, I think we're not. Maybe I should ask Jeff to do.
So one of the themes you will likely hear is repeated is we don't know. The drafting of this law is not clear. The law says that a town cannot adopt a bylaw that would prohibit a medical marijuana dispensary from converting to recreational. It's possible that the moratorium could be interpreted as preventing that conversion, and therefore the moratorium would not be able to stop it. So the law says that we as a town cannot stop a medical dispensary from converting to recreational sales. It may be interpreted by a court to say that a moratorium is something that stops a medical dispensary from converting to recreational sales, and therefore the moratorium would not necessarily apply to a converted establishment.
So who would take them to court? The town would?
It depends on probably what the Cannabis Control Commission does. If the Cannabis Control Commission says to the medical dispensary, you cannot convert because there's a moratorium, then the dispensary may sue and say, no, the law says you can't stop us from converting. If they make the reverse decision, then yes, a municipality would have to be the ones to initiate legal action.
I'm curious, I don't know whether this is a question for Rob or for Jeff, but I did read an article in the paper a few weeks ago when the Cannabis Coalition came to Holyoke, and there were a bunch of farmers that were very distraught that they weren't able to grow things on their own land or even take them to farmers market. So I'd love to hear your comment on that. But the other thing I'm wondering about is, do any of these articles that, if passed, would they limit, because they're so complex, so that a local establishment couldn't be created under this law? Or are these chains? Who has already applied? What kind of outfits are they?
All right, so to answer your first question about farming, the one substantive thing that the December basically delay legislation did was also say marijuana cultivation is not a protected agricultural use. What the further amendments this summer did is say that if a municipality wants to consider it an agricultural use, they can. I think that there are some challenges with our growing season in New England compared to other places where outdoor, farmland grows may not be economically feasible, as well as the costs of securing those locations. Right now, what we thought was really important, given the short time frame, we thought that retail sales were the most pressing issue, and so that's what we tried to deal with these articles specifically. So that's something that could be addressed in the future, but we haven't at this time.
Do you know if the current applicants, the medical people, are they a chain that might be operating in Colorado and whatever other states it's legal, or are they local?
So the way the medical structure was set up, it's completely vertically integrated. So you can only sell what you grow or produce yourself by the same company. That's not the case for recreational. So that's why agricultural might work, where you just farm and you sell to a retailer or a wholesaler that then sells it. To try to answer your second question, one, we're pretty confident that this would allow recreational sales to at least one to open, probably up to 8, I think, if that bylaw is adopted. None have applied because there is no application process right now. So that's not possible. But the law says you can't effectively prohibit recreational sales without passing a total ban. So if our bylaws were deemed to prohibit it, then they would probably be struck down. But we don't think that they do.
Do I understand that the main reason for the moratorium is because you just don't know what regulations are going to come out from the Cannabis Commission in March?
That would be a reason to vote for the moratorium. The planning board did not take a position on the moratorium. We are not recommending the moratorium. The moratorium is on the warrant to give town meeting the opportunity to decide itself whether it wants to put the moratorium on. But we don't have a position on it.
Oh, okay. Right.
Two things. I'm intrigued by the what you said about marijuana cultivation and sales being continuing to be illegal from a federal standpoint. I'm curious if we could have some federal enforcement against, say, the town of Amherst for allowing this sort of stuff, or against the vendors and cultivators. That's the first question. The second question is, if this doesn't all work out, and it seems as horrible as it's likely to be, should we blame the Economic Development Director?
Recreational marijuana sales take place around the country in various states. So there's no reason to think that Amherst would be targeted as opposed to Colorado or somewhere else. You want to feel the other one?
I just wanted to add one thing, which I think is an interesting fact. It doesn't necessarily clarify what we're talking about, but marijuana salespeople or entities are not using the banking system. So it's all cash transactions, and that's because of this federal ban, federal prohibition. So banks are not interested in interacting with marijuana sellers, nor are credit card companies, and so they have to do all their transactions by cash. So I just thought I'd offer that bit of interest.
Just to answer your question, I think it's an important one. I did not approach this as the Economic Development Director. I was asked to take a... No, I know, but I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to address that, because I did look at it from a what is best for the town, not necessarily economic development.
Okay, I guess we're going to take more questions at the end of the program. I'm going to move on to the other zoning articles now. So we have two other articles. Article 8 is the next in our series of Table 3 footnote pairing articles. Table 3 is the dimensional table. It's where all the heights and lot coverage and frontage and all those requirements are listed for each zone. There are a lot of footnotes associated with Table 3. Most of those are rarely used and or not used, or are not really needed in the table itself. They are perfectly adequate in other places. So in an effort to clean up the table, to make it less intimidating, the planning board has been bringing a series of articles to delete those footnotes and move them elsewhere in the bylaw. So this one is the next two footnotes, footnote J and footnote K. Footnote J changes the lot coverage requirement for the limited business zone from 70% to 80%, sorry, from 85% to 70% in a single area of town. There are 3 areas of town where the limited business zone exists: around the general business district, on University Drive, and at the southern end of Dickinson Street. Footnote J only applies to Dickinson Street. And in fact, there are only 3 parcels on Dickinson Street that are in the BL zone. So footnote J really only applies to 3 parcels, 2 of which are non-conforming. They already exceed 70% lot coverage, and 1 of which doesn't even have any frontage. So we don't think that footnote J serves any purpose. We're proposing to just delete it. Footnote K allows the planning board as the permitting body for cluster subdivisions to modify certain dimensions that are already automatically modified as a result of being in a cluster subdivision. The already modified dimensions are listed at the bottom of the dimensional table, but they don't really need to be. They really should be in section 4.3 of the zoning bylaw, which is where all the other regulations for cluster subdivisions are. So we're not going to delete footnote K, we're going to just move it to move it and the bottom 4 rows of the dimensional table to section 4.3 of the zoning bylaw for cluster subdivisions. It will have the same effect. No regulatory authority is lost. Nothing is lost. It's just in a different place. And when that happens, if you approve that, there will be only 3 footnotes left on table 3, A, B, and M. And those are the ones that people tend to be most concerned about anyway. Article 9 is a proposal to change the permitting standard for commercial for-profit parking facilities in some of the business zones in town. The general business zone, the village center business zone, and the commercial zone. A municipal parking lot has a permitting standard of site plan review. It's allowed by, if the town wanted to put a parking lot in any of those zones, it's allowed to. It requires a site plan review by the planning board. However, a for-profit parking facility in any of those zones requires a special permit. It's highly unlikely that anyone is going to propose a for-profit parking facility in town, but if they did, the special permit is a hurdle that they don't necessarily, we don't think they should have to cross. So we're proposing to match the permitting standard for commercial for-profit parking facilities in those 3 zones, general business, village center business, and comm, change that from SP to SPR to match the municipal parking permitting standard. That will enable, if it should happen, for an easier way for the developer to partner with the town to put up a parking facility potentially in any of those areas. We don't actually expect it to happen, but we don't think there's any reason to have a special permit attached to this use. I'll take questions on those.
Just for the record, you know of no developer who is interested in this, planning to do it in the wings, has it as a twinkle in his eye? Is there anything out there that's coming down the pike that would take advantage of this?
There is nothing that we know of. You may have read in the paper about Greenfield's municipal parking lot that had to be reduced because the amount that they had budgeted for it, the number of spaces had to be reduced because the amount that they had budgeted for it was not enough. So it's very expensive to build a parking lot. It is very unlikely that anyone would want to do that, but it's not completely inconceivable. But right now we have no idea that anyone wants to do it. No one has asked us for this.
This is just a clarification, but the impetus for this zoning amendment came from the Downtown Parking Working Group, which is trying to maximize the number of parking spaces that are available in the downtown area, and they felt that it might make it more likely that somebody might want to operate either a commercial parking lot or perhaps even build a for-profit parking garage. So they were the ones who suggested this, and the planning board took them up on that suggestion and came forth with this zoning amendment.
If the impetus in part is to line up the private parking with public parking requirements, why are we leaving the BL as an SP instead of reducing that to an SPR for parking, and why the difference in the BN versus between private and public? Or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's a good question. The reason is because the BL is a very contentious zone right now. We didn't think that the article would pass if we were to propose parking facility in the BL zone. It's unlikely that anything would be proposed again, but we just didn't think it was worth it. Just so people know, the CVS town lot is not in the BL zone, just in case you were wondering. It's in the RG zone.
All right, we're going to go on to Article 12, which is the public shade trees, and that is Henry Lappin, who's chair of the Shade Tree Committee.
Yeah, hi everyone. I haven't never brought an ordinance before a town meeting before, so it's kind of interesting. The Shade Tree Committee has worked on this ordinance for about a year. We've met with Molly Freilicher, who's the Community Action Forester for the state of Massachusetts, DCR. We've met with a lot with Alan Snow, Guilford Mooring, a lot of people we've run this by. We feel it's important to have an ordinance because it will bring the current policy, which Alan Snow uses to determine when trees get cut down, et cetera, but to codify it into regular law. Right now, it's just his policy, and it doesn't have the weight that we would like it to have. It does not affect the town finances at all, except perhaps to bring in a small amount of money in fines, but that's really not the major reason. The major reason is to protect the trees and do the best we can to protect the trees. Are there any questions? Oh, yeah.
When your regulations are developed, who will finally approve of those regulations? Will it just be the Shade Tree Committee, the Select Board, or who, so that someone oversees those regulations before they're implemented?
Right, good question. So we're an advisory committee to Alan Snow, the tree warden, or whoever the tree warden would be. And between the tree warden and the Select Board, they will make the decisions. So we've got a bunch of ideas of things we want in there. Alan supports them. We'll bring it to the Select Board and work it out.
When I'm on the planning board, obviously, and we have had hearings to recommend or not the removal of public trees, and there is the tree warden has a policy. I'm not sure if it's his policy or where the policy is of requiring compensation for taking down a tree. Is there a compensation schedule in this?
There is in what we originally wrote up, but at the suggestion of town council, we've worded it fairly broadly to get permission to have the ordinance, and then and a couple of details, but then the rest of the details will be worked out in the future. So we're hoping that the current policy, which includes, I think it's $90 per inch of standing tree, if you cut it down, that money gets into the replacement fund for us to plant new trees. So we're hoping that will continue there. So we're basing it on what the policy is now, but that hasn't been finalized. Right. All right, well, thank you very much.
All right, and now next, Article 13. John Hornick, who's a member of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee Subcommittee, and this is about establishing a town meeting advisory committee.
Thank you.
Did I say it's John Hornick?
John Hornick, exactly. Okay. A proposal to create a town meeting advisory committee. This article rests on one simple idea. What if there were a group that was committed to reviewing individual warrant articles prior to town meeting and reporting on both the pros and cons? Let's briefly examine that proposition. What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? Well, first, town meeting generally only hears one point of view when people speak to an article, whether it is the author or authors, the select board, the finance committee, the planning board, or individual members. People typically have a position to defend. Rarely, if ever, does the speaker say, here are the reasons to vote for this article, but let me also note some reservations. That's what I'm going to attempt to do. Most legislative bodies, and town meeting is the town legislature, have multiple committees to vet proposed statutes, generally well before they come to the floor. In our legislature, in which members are volunteers with very limited time to do advanced research, this should provide information that will be quite helpful. Slam dunk, as they say, but aren't there ways in which this could go wrong? Well, despite the obligation to research and present both pros and cons, the members could be biased and fail to meet their responsibilities. I would hope not, but certainly possible. Ideally, one person's bias would be offset by another's, and we would get a balanced analysis. But there is nothing in the proposed bylaw to guarantee this. How about expertise? Town meeting generally faces a very diverse set of articles. Zoning articles, particularly, are often quite challenging, Rob. Will the committee have the necessary skills and experiences to do a good job? I would hope they would take advantage of the skills and experience of other Amherst citizens through interviews, public hearings, and the like, if they don't have it themselves. That would make sense, but again, no guarantees. External to the proposed article itself, the proposers have argued that there are a range of issues that ought to be considered by the committee. The following are examples of impacts that the report may address with respect to any particular article as appropriate. Benefits and impacts to specific neighborhoods, benefits and impacts to individual taxpayers, benefits and impacts to specific populations, children, elderly, families, benefits and impacts to the streetscape of the town, benefits and impacts to the town history and culture, benefits and impacts to public safety, benefits and impacts to the town economy, and benefits and impacts to the environment. Even though every issue I've listed will not be relevant to every article, that's still a tall order. Will the committee have the motivation and energy to pursue these questions? Will we get volunteers willing to sign on? I guess this is obvious, but we can only find out if we try. Would the committee be a drain on the precious time of town staff and others when committee members seek information to prepare their report? What will the true costs of the committee be? We could point to the Finance Committee, which has a similar but non-overlapping role to the proposed Town Meeting Advisory Committee. It seems to be able to keep its costs within reasonable bounds. But is that a fair comparison? Will anyone read and value the Town Meeting Advisory Committee report? I personally would look forward to reading such a report and hearing what the committee had to say to town meeting. My guess is that there are others who would agree, or at least agree that it's worthwhile to give the committee a shot. We recommend that we enact the bylaw and in 3 years' time ask for a revote. If this is a valuable idea, 3 years is long enough to prove itself. If it is not helpful, then we can remove the bylaw from the universe, as well as the committee, or tinker with the language if changes would fix what's wrong. Although there are likely more pros and cons to consider, I'll leave that to others. After all is said and done, each of us will weigh these and decide whether the potential benefits outweigh the risks of going forward. Thank you for your attention. I guess I'm out of time, so questions would be reserved for later.
All right, our next is, yes. Okay, yeah, we could have time for a question or two, actually. We're a little ahead. Any questions? I was curious if there are other towns or cities that have similar.
The only one that I'm aware of is Brookline Town Meeting. And Brookline has what would be considered the equivalent of this committee combined into a single group with its Finance Committee. At this point, we've reserved what the Finance Committee currently does for the Finance Committee, that is, look at the issues of whether or not the town can afford to adopt a particular article or not. And that is not under the province, or would not be under the province of this committee. Well,
I highly support this, and I've always thought that town meetings should be more involved in town making decisions, be it as we're the ending point for so many financial decisions that get made in town. Do you see this committee having someone sit? I'll just give you an example. We have a Fort River Building Study Committee. It seems like somebody from town meeting in this committee would sit also on that committee to be able to provide updates back to town meeting on what they're thinking about, what they're planning, to provide some sort of a write-up. What's the scope of what they would sit on in terms of what they would be involved in? Because 9 people, I'm looking at the number, seems like maybe not enough in order to handle the amount of committees we have in Amherst and issues.
well, I certainly would think that the committee would have maybe 2 or 3 members to follow the Fort River issue. They would probably have 2 or 3 members who sit in with the Finance Committee. So yes, I agree absolutely that would be a way for them to gather information, because as I pointed out, typically the committee that's going to come back with a proposal to town meeting is going to say, here's what we should do, period. And so this, hopefully provides more balance. Again, with 9 people, that is a limited number. Maybe it should be larger, I don't know, but it means that they have to experiment. They won't necessarily be able to get to every town meeting article. They'll probably have to make some decisions about where they can provide the most benefit. Chris?
One more, and then.
I know the answer to this, but do all the members of the the Town Meeting Advisory Committee have to be town meeting members?
No, they do not. They have to be citizens of Amherst, but people can volunteer for this committee. There is a somewhat complicated, convoluted process that we've come up with for identifying people, or in addition to allowing people to self-identify. There would be an election in which town meeting members would vote to determine who actually will serve on the committee. Did I get it right, Chris?
Okay, thank you. And now we have Article 14, a petition asking for significant improvement to the North Amherst Library. And Pat Howland is a petitioner for this.
Article 14 is asking for $50,000 from the town for an architect's design for improvements to the North Amherst Library. This article is brought by the Friends of the North Amherst Library. The building is in violation of the federal law made back in 1990 called the Americans with Disabilities Act. That act prohibits discrimination based on a disability. When that law took effect, Amherst promptly began work to renovate Town Hall in compliance with that act. The North Amherst Library was built in 1893, and the steps up to its only door are not accessible by wheelchair. These stairs also make it difficult for those using walkers or lifting strollers. This library building is owned by the town, not by the Jones Library. The Jones Library staffs and manages the library and has in the past used donated funds to make improvements to the building, but it is the town that is responsible for making this library accessible. The only way to have this access will be by an elevator. The Disabilities Act also requires a wheelchair-accessible bathroom and a water fountain. Right now, the bathroom in the library is down a steep, narrow stairway and is not open to the users of the library. This summer, a local retired school teacher, Terry Johnson, donated a rented porta-potty to the library for 2 months to help the children's summer reading program. Obviously, having a bathroom would have been better. The building has 3 floors, and a wheelchair-accessible elevator would provide access to all 3 floors. The basement is of full height with windows and houses books along with a huge oil tank. The architect could explore alternate means of heating and cooling and free up space. The attic has a pitched ceiling with full height in the center of the room and would be a good spot for community meetings. It has 2 half-circle windows. The reason we are requesting $50,000 instead of a smaller amount for design by an architect is that $50,000 is the minimum under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30B, Section 6, for competitive sealed proposals, when selection of the most advantageous offer requires a comparative judgment of factors in addition to the price. That means that the town can evaluate proposals not just on price, but on the quality of the proposed design. The $50,000 would come from free cash, which currently has $5.1 million in it, according to the Finance Committee's report. And I recognize from what was said that this may drop down to $3.8 million on the vote of our upcoming town meeting. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is the intention to compensate all entries to the design competition in some way?
Yes. There's only one entry, and the design competition would address that issue in particular, as well as the issue of an elevator that is needed.
So people who are entering the competition would not be compensated for the work that they're doing in the competition?
The $50,000 would be allotted for the building, but not for the drawing up the design.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And Article 15 next, a petition that has come from the mothers out front. Chris Riddle, a member of the Energy Working Group. Chris Riddle? Oh, there he is.
Hello, I'm Chris Riddle, speaking for the Zero Energy Working Group of Mothers Out Front. Article 15 adds a new bylaw committing Amherst to building all of its own buildings as zero energy buildings in the future. Next slide, and yes, that's who we are. And the next slide after that. Most Amherst citizens agree that climate change is real and human activity is its primary cause. We are risking the future of our children, and their children by failing to act now to reverse climate change. Next slide. Buildings are a huge part of the problem. They represent almost half of the U.S. CO2 emissions. All towns and cities should stop I'm sorry, all cities and towns and cities should have similar bylaws. We can be one of the first. Change slide. Zero energy buildings, sometimes called net zero buildings, generate from renewable sources as much energy as they consume over the course of a year. They are designed to be highly energy efficient so that renewables, most often solar, photovoltaics, can supply the remaining energy needed. Here, back up, please. Previous slide, please. Here's a picture of the Kern Center at Hampshire College, one of 4 institutional zero-energy buildings recently completed in Amherst. Next slide. Zero energy isn't common, but it isn't unusual either. If the objective is established early, and if the design and the team has the skills and experience, it's very doable. The main features are a high level of insulation, triple glazed windows, efficient HVAC, lighting and appliances, and of course, renewable energy. Next slide. There's the first cost premium. We've done a projection, and we've used 10% in our projections. But it's not like other extra cost items like more space or better finishes. That premium has a dollar return, sizable energy savings over time. It provides the funds to pay off the loan that you take out to pay for the extra cost. Next slide. Here are 2 graphs that illustrate that. The top one is a 30-year, this is a 30-year projection for a generic building costing about $10 million. It's based on buying at retail prices and no incentives, grants, or subsidies. The top graph is the ZE building. The bottom graph is the ordinary building. The orange bars are energy cost. The blue bars are loan payments that are required to pay for the extra cost for zero energy. The energy bars grow over time with inflation. I've used 2% energy inflation cost. The debt service bars, a 20-year municipal bond, reduce over time as the principal is paid off. So, for the 20 years of bond payments, there is a small overall premium for ZE over the ordinary building. The energy cost for the ZE building is very much less, but the bond payments make the first 20 years about 30% more costly overall. But there is a huge bonus after the bond payments are over. In 25 years, the overall totals even out, and from then on, the citizens cash in. Hey, next slide, please. And here's another view of the same data, merging the 2 graphs. You can see that after 16 years, the bond payments plus energy for the ZE building equal the energy alone for the ordinary building. Next slide. And this graph illustrates how ZE buildings are rapidly becoming more and more common. Next slide. Here are 4 more nearby ZE buildings: the Hitchcock Center, Crotty Hall at the University, the Putney Field House at Putney School, and South Congregational Church. ZE can be done. It is being done nearby in a climate like ours, and ZE can be achieved in different ways. I'm happy to talk after this about the details of our article. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have Article 16, which is also a petition from the Mothers Out Front, and Andra Rose, chair of the Mothers Out Front, will talk about resolution to support 100% renewable energy.
Hi, thank you. This resolution in support of 100% renewable energy is submitted by Amherst Mothers Out Front and Climate Action Now, Western Mass. The proposal is in 2 parts, really. One is to support the idea of Massachusetts going 100% renewable in the form of supporting legislation that would do that, and supporting the town in general in going 100% renewable. One feature of that more local approach is that the resolution asks that town consider in making decisions, especially those big ones, whether this would further our progress towards 100% renewable or slow it down. We say in all decisions, obviously the intent is for that to be applied most stringently to the big expenditures that last for a long time, which is where you see the impact most of poor decisions about the infrastructure and buildings. A group of citizens from Pelham, Northampton, and Amherst have been working on this idea of how do we go 100% renewable. It sounds expensive. So one way that in our research we found to do it in a very economical way is modeled on a way that California towns and counties have committed to reducing their greenhouse gases in a significant way. And it's called community choice energy, also called community choice aggregation. And what makes it an economical way to reduce our carbon footprint is that it involves purchasing electricity in bulk and selling it to all the customers, business, residents, town, in our communal entity, which we propose would be a multi-municipal effort. So in doing that, there's a source of revenue. Some of the revenue goes to ideally reducing, but at least trying to maintain rates. But part of it gets held out for doing the energy efficiency targeted to those buildings that use the most, to reduce the entire community's use of energy, and towards, little by little, more and more renewable energy that is generated and used in place, for instance, in zero energy buildings. But there are also other ways, and the sky's the limit. And it takes, 5, 10, 15 years for it to really become mature. So the request is that town consider this. Northampton will be considering a very similar resolution sometime in the next couple months. So, thank you.
All right, let's see. Next, we have a petition from the Pioneer Valley Death with Dignity Task Force, and Nadine Shank will talk about resolution in support of end-of-life options.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about Article 17, which is a non-binding resolution for the Amherst Town Meeting to call on the state legislature to pass the End-of-Life Options Act and make Massachusetts the 7th state, plus Washington, D.C., to allow citizens to request and receive compassionate aid in dying medication from their doctors. I'm a longtime Amherst resident. Some of you may know me through my work at UMass, where I've been a piano professor since 1980, or you may know me from local gyms where I teach aerobics and spinning classes. For many years, I've been a firm believer in allowing medical aid in dying to people who are terminally ill and are also desperately seeking relief from unremitting physical pain. Like me, many of our local citizens wish for and seek legislative action to permit this. In a short time, I gathered 142 petition signatures, and many more people wish to be added to that list. In 2012, Amherst voters voted over 72% in favor of a statewide referendum to approve medical aid in dying, feeling that no one should be made to suffer needlessly and should be allowed a death with dignity. Just last week, the Northampton City Council unanimously approved such a resolution. My 98-year-old mother, Jerry, who lives alone and has survived breast cancers and a stroke, actively worries that her life could end slowly in terrible pain and with no quality of life, and that her only choice would be dehydration and starvation. Dying from such self-induced renal failure could take 5 to 15 days. Regarding the Hippocratic Oath, some doctors feel that patients are harmed when they are forced to endure unrelenting pain while waiting for an inevitable death. If this End-of-Life Options Act were made law, doctors would be able to end the continuing harm to their patients by helping the mentally capable patient die in her own time and on her own terms. Annual public health data in Oregon and Washington shows that of every 1,000 people who die, 4 have requested and been approved to use this option. Out of that number, 1/3 of the people don't end up taking the medication, but are greatly comforted just knowing that they have this option. If you have further questions about the issue and the bill in the legislature, I and Northampton resident John Berkowitz, the coordinator of our group, Pioneer Valley Death with Dignity Action Group, would be happy to address them. I've made many copies of the article, which will either be sent in a bulk mailing or will be available on the back table at the November 6th town meeting. I and my fellow petitioners and countless others hope you will vote yes at the upcoming town meeting and show our state legislature Amherst's support for this End-of-Life Options Act. Thank you again for allowing me to speak tonight. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, from the school committee, for Articles 10 and 11, Phoebe Hazard. Yeah. We'll talk about Regional School Planning Committee and, or a Regional School Planning Committee, and Article 11 is resolution regarding charter school funding and expansion.
That's right, thank you. And I apologize, we are in the middle of a school committee meeting right now, so we may duck out right after this, but we should have a little bit of time for questions after I present each article. So Article 10, Regional School District Planning Committee. In the town meeting packet, you will find a printout of a presentation that looks like this. It's entitled Amherst Pelham Regionalization Study, and this provides background and information about this article. And before I get into more detail, please note that I will be requesting from the town meeting floor that the last sentence of this article be changed to include pre-kindergarten, so that it reads a regional school district for students in grades pre-kindergarten through 6, and this change has been approved by the moderator. This article asks Amherst Town Meeting to vote to form a study group to examine the implications of forming a pre-kindergarten through 6th grade region with another town. Pelham Town Meeting has recently voted to form an RSDPC, a Regional School District Planning Committee, and should this article pass in Amherst, the 2 planning committees from Amherst and Pelham can vote to join together to form a planning board. This board would then study regionalization between Amherst and Pelham elementary schools, focusing on issues such as finances, governance, and educational implications. I want to stress that a vote for this article is not a vote for regionalization. It is a vote to study it in more depth. A decision to regionalize requires a significant process culminating with another vote by both town meetings. So why go forward with this study? Pelham and Amherst are both facing upcoming financial challenges and are looking for new external revenue streams to maintain essential educational programming. If you look on the last page of that packet that I showed you, it shows the potential financial savings. There would be an anticipated $240,000 in annual transportation reimbursement from the state, which would be shared between the towns. This is money that the state gives to towns in order to ease transportation costs and to incentivize regionalization. Another potential financial revenue would be a one-time bonus aid of $63,650, which is another state incentive for regionalization. The Amherst School Committee discussed this article and unanimously voted to endorse it. The general sense of the committee was that along with finances, given the current challenges around infrastructure and enrollment in our town, there are enough potential educational benefits from regionalization with Pelham to warrant further study. It's important to note that this study is significantly less complex than the most recent exploration of K through 12 regionalization, which involved 4 towns and would have required opening and changing an existing agreement. This study involves 2 towns, and there is no existing regional agreement to change. Furthermore, our 2 districts already share curriculum, a central office, and that makes this process much more straightforward. In terms of cost to the town, should this pass, the superintendent is hopeful that we can apply for and receive a grant. It's entitled the Efficiency and Regionalization Competitive Grant Program, and that would fund necessary outside resources and expertise. In the event that this money does not come through, consultation and resources will be covered internally without further cost to the town. In terms of a time frame around regionalization, around a regionalization study and then possibly voting to regionalize, this is a multi-year process. Should regionalization articles come back to the 2 town meetings for approval and should both pass, the soonest we would anticipate changes would be the fall of 2020. So are there any questions about this? Yes?
How would an agreement like this affect capital planning for 1 or more new elementary schools?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that that's the type of thing that this study group is going to study. What does it look like financially as we go forward? I mean, we have not studied this yet, so I can't tell you. I mean, that's the kind of work that this committee would have the ability to explore.
Okay.
Doesn't satisfy you, but.
Any other questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the next article is Article 11, resolution regarding charter school funding and expansion. Amherst School Committee voted unanimously on September 25th to put this article on the fall town warrant. This article arose from ongoing concerns about the funding formula for charter schools, which we believe is fundamentally flawed as it is based on the spending level of the district, is taken directly from the sending district's funding, and does so without consideration for the need level of the students sent. For districts such as Amherst and Amherst-Pelham Regional that choose to substantially invest in strong programs and resources for students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students, it escalates the budget impact. This formula actually creates a disincentive for districts to service special needs students with their peers with in-district programming. Furthermore, the state's charter school reimbursement program has not been fully funded since 2012. The total cost of charter school tuition to Amherst and the region in FY 2017 was $3,288,413. Given that the elementary school and regional budgets combined make up approximately 42% of Amherst's budget, the Amherst School Committee feels that an issue of such financial impact on the schools is appropriate to bring before town meeting, the body charged with overseeing the town's budget. This resolution asks that the legislature develop a funding formula for district public schools and charter schools that adequately funds their respective missions, and that the state not approve any charter school expansion requests until this formula has been corrected. I want to point you to the materials that are enclosed in your packet. This includes two charts detailing the past 8 years of charter school funding and reimbursement for Amherst and the region. I'm not sure if everybody sees that. I can pull it out. Looks like this. And also enclosed is an excellent article from the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center explaining charter school funding. Charter school funding is it's a relatively complicated formula, and I highly recommend reading this article if you're interested in really getting a better handle on how the funding system currently works and what the implications are. It's kind of hard to understand through a casual conversation, so I think that if you take the time to read it, it's really, really helpful. So, any questions? Yes. Microphone, yeah.
I'm curious about if you've gotten feedback from any of the families that have opted to put their kids in charter schools, because it seems to me that changing the formula is a pretty big task and we'd have to do it statewide, but what if are there interviews of families that have left and find out why? Because maybe we can make some local changes that would attract them back.
Yep. There actually was recently a survey done of charter choice and private school families where we got information from regional and Amherst families that's been presented to the Amherst and the regional school committee. And that information is all available.
Yeah, at arps.org website. Yeah, it's so just the main school website, arps.org. There should be a link to the charter, the exit survey that was sent to charter families.
It's not exactly an exit survey. It's more of a survey was sent out to anybody who is not sending their child to our schools. Charter choice and private school survey. And it actually was very helpful and informative. And there's so, and Peter, you can jump in here as you wish, but I think there was interesting a lot about curricular offerings, thematic learning.
Yeah, I think one of the main points, so it varied depending on whether you're talking about charter versus private versus choice. And it varied depending on grade and depending on school. So it's good to delve into the data. But some of the first suggestions were that it wasn't anything about anything that was lacking in Amherst Public Schools, but that there was a particular uniqueness about the school that fit the child's needs. I think it's also important to point out that relative to other districts, we actually lose a fairly low percentage of our students to charter schools. That being said, because the formula is so broken, it's quite a large financial hit. It was $3.3 million that we paid in charter tuition last year, Amherst and Amherst Regional combined. And there is a cap of charter school money that we can lose, which is 9% of net school spending. And the Department of Education estimated that 9% cap for us would be $5.2 million. So there's another $2 million that we could potentially lose if charters keep adding and keep expanding. And you all know what a $2 million cut to the school budget right now would be, or what that would be over years. And so this is why the school committee felt the urgency to bring this issue to town meeting and address, at least in general, the funding for it.
I'm just wondering if that survey information, where the best, isn't there a town meeting place where we can post documents? So let me work on getting that onto that place so that everybody can have easy access. Okay, sure.
I should have introduced Mr. Deming, who's a member of the school.
Peter Demling School Committee, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to minimize the financial problems created by charter schools for Amherst, but I do think that in fact, the schools face a larger problem, which has kind of been hidden. The town of Amherst, over the last 15 years, has lost in the neighborhood of 700 families with children under the age of 18. The number of school-age children residing in Amherst has been reduced by over 1,000 during the same period. So basically, the Amherst market has fewer and fewer customers, so to speak, for the schools. And that's independent of what's happening with the charter schools or pretty much anything else. And as you do capital planning and other planning, the question is, what do you do? How do you take that into account? Thank you.
And I just want to, I could speak to the fact that right now there's a group called the Enrollment Working Group that has a series of subgroups, and one of them is looking at demographic shifts and how people have, why people are leaving, where people are going. So, you know, we're taking a little bit of a deeper dive into that as an area of study.
Yeah, I guess I would also add that you know, it's certainly not as simple as saying charters are the reason for declining enrollment. That's not the position of the committee. It's not what this resolution says. But you know, it is an outsized financial impact in terms of it's 30% of the increase in our expenses over the last 10 years are directly because of charter tuition. And that's had a significant impact on our budget. So it's not the whole picture of why there are not as many students as there used to be, but it is part of the picture. And it's something that the state, when the Department of Education is considering charter additions and amendments, they ask the public for input. They want to hear from all constituencies, individuals, boards, towns, and so this is an opportunity to do that.
Any further questions? If not, we can go into our question and answer period.
Thank you very much.
And I see that Mr. Kravitz is still here. Any questions more about marijuana? There's a question there.
I just wanted to make a correction to what I said when I was presenting Article 14 about the North Amherst Library, and I think you asked about the $50,000. That would go to the winning plan that is accepted by the town for the addition to the architect of that plan.
Further question over here.
As a comment for Pat, and I'm on your side. I'm really all in favor of this, but I'm putting on my architect hat here. Architects are not used to competing for by design competition for commissions to do a project X or Y or Z without some form of compensation, and do not look favorably towards a design competition, an uncompensated design competition that that goes along with an RFP or an RFQ.
I have a question for Article 15, the net zero energy buildings. Can you elaborate a little bit on your rationale to keep, if I understand the article correctly, that you have kept it around solar and wind power, and why you didn't perhaps branch out to other forms of the new technologies?
Good question. We are other technologies that are often talked about in this context are quote geothermal, otherwise known as ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps, and those are not in the industry and generally not thought of as renewable energy systems. Those are efficiency systems. Those are systems which make heating and air conditioning much more efficient than conventional heating and air conditioning systems, and they do not generate electricity. And we need to have for a zero energy building, you have to have a energy use figure, and you have to have an energy generation figure. Air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps do not generate any electricity. So we're entirely in favor of those technologies. I have air source heat pumps in my house, and they're one of the reasons why my house is zero energy. It's very efficient. It cuts down on the demand so that the renewable energy is much less. That's the virtue of those kinds of technologies. We have thought about biomass burning as a technology that many think about as a renewable energy source. And we have decided not to. We didn't put that on our list because it's arguable, at least in the short term, as to whether its effect on the atmosphere is positive. There are people in this town that disagree with me on that, but I would say that we're wanting to discourage that. So that as far as systems which can generate electricity that can balance can generate energy, which can to balance the demand on the building. The ones that jump immediately to mind are photovoltaics and wind. There's also heat. What am I trying to say? Solar thermal panels on the roof that generate heat, that heat water, or that can heat the building or heat hot water, domestic hot water. Those are perfectly viable. That's another very good system that we don't have on our list, but it has the same effect as reducing the amount of demand on the building, so that the renewable sources, photovoltaics and wind, have less work to do. Hope that's not too complicated a question. Yes, I'm in an answer.
You're talking about just the energy costs once the building is built, I believe.
That's correct.
But not the energy and environmental costs of, say, the building materials that are being used, transported, manufactured, extracted from the earth, the cost of demolition, perhaps, of an older building. Is any
energy.
of that being counted in any way in your thinking?
Well, that's right, Kitty. That's a good question also. We were trying to make this an extremely simple one-pager. That is to say, describe an objective, zero energy, the same amount of energy in is the amount of energy in equals the amount of energy out. And embodied energy is certainly a big part of the demands on the planet. And some buildings have much more embodied energy than other buildings. It's just very complicated and complex and arcane to try to describe that in any kind of rigorous way. And we have basically tried to do it with a simple one-pager. Well, let me say one other thing. There are sustainability guidelines such as LEED or Green Globes or Living Building Challenge or Passive House that we could have used as a standard to determine whether a building is positive, meets the test or not. And again, I just listed 4. Which one would we use? And all 4 of them have a big first-time cost associated with compliance, paperwork cost. And again, we decided to stay away from that too. We have nothing against those certification programs, and the town of Amherst could elect to. We're certainly not discouraging them, but we think that what counts. We were trying to come up with a one-pager. I keep saying that a simple, standard, energy in equals energy out, and that's what we're trying to encourage the town to at least start with. Anything more?
Just a question of clarification from your previous answer about why just solar, mentioning just the solar and the wind. Does that mean to imply you're envisioning that the building then has to be heated and cooled with electricity?
Yes. These are all electric buildings. The ones everything that we've shown you are all electric buildings that have PV on the roof and that produce that are very efficiently designed. There's two parts of this. You have to have a very efficient building envelope, insulation, airtightness, and you have to, and very efficient HVAC systems. And once you've made the building really efficient, then it doesn't take too much PV to provide the difference between that and full zero energy. It's all very doable. I was on the board, I was on the group that built the Hitchcock Center. I was the owner's project manager. And the Hitchcock Center is, a very doable building. And it also complied with Living Building Challenge, which is extremely rigorous. And one of the reasons it was a fairly expensive building. But it wasn't expensive because of its zero net energy. It was expensive for a lot of other reasons. Anything more?
Are the petitioners considering bringing any amendments to Article 15?
That's me, isn't it? Yes, it is. We in the back table we have made three small amendments to the warrant article that you have in the warrant. First, I'll read these. Under on-site renewable energy systems, there's a clarification. For purposes of this bylaw, renewable energy systems not on the project site and or not on the same electric meter as the subject buildings or additions may be used if insufficient solar or wind exposure is available on the project site. There are a couple of conditions. We're saying that if you can't get enough solar on your site, we'll accept solar on an adjacent site, a nearby site, a faraway site, so long as it's metered separately and so long as we can compare the input, the generation of the PV in Acton or somewhere as long as it's dedicated to this project and we can meter it separately and know what it's generating and compare it to the metering that we have here, then we'll accept that. And that was because we had a question from the Finance Committee, and he said, basically he said, why does the atmosphere care if the stuff is generated on the site or remotely from the site? We have allowed an exception for emergency power generators. Most public buildings of this size have generators for emergency power, and they use a tiny amount of energy, and there really isn't any PV-based products out there in the market. We've decided we allowed that on the suggestion of the DPW. And lastly, what else did it help me with this? What else? What am I forgetting here? What? And we exempted. We had the Jones Library listed as one of the agencies that would have to comply with this. And then we subsequently learned that the Jones Library building is not a town building. It's owned by the Jones Library, Inc. And that makes it complicated and intricate. And also the project a certain ways down the road, but mostly it's just that the building is it's not owned by the town. And so we removed the Jones Library project from our list.
Do you still have a question?
This is a
copy of the actual motion sheet. Motion is on the back table.
Chris, this question is for you. So, given the capital needs in Amherst right now, it's Andrew Parker. I've emailed you a couple of times about this, and I was curious about some sort of a mock-up that we could see to present to people, because I think we're going to need a lot of town support. Because I'm worried that given some of the population and seeing the savings, I'm a younger member in town. I believe in this. I'm concerned about limiting ourselves to a binding agreement that's going to require us to build all of these buildings when we need them all now. And I want to do a right decision, but we need to be able to sell this or support it. So, has there been any public comment on this, or we done any more? Can we get maybe some more public comment? Would you consider not making it binding? And perhaps could we see, or could you tell me where the $10 million figure came up for the building and how that would compare to what a fire station would be or what we would need, so we could really see what these additional costs are? Because, it seems like it makes sense. I just wanted to see how are we going to sell it to the town.
A lot of questions there. The $10 million number was, the $10 million building was just me trying to pick a generic number, generic building size. I based that 10% figure on the Hitchcock Center as terms of how much of that, what was the additional cost that could be attributed to high efficiency and to the PV on the roof. We thought about what about could we be a little bit zero net energy? Could we be 90% zero energy or 82% zero energy? I don't know. It seems to me that it's doable at 100% zero energy. We've shown it. We have worked on projects that are that way, and there are many of them. It can be done in northern climates. We didn't want to say. We didn't want it to be a recommendation. We wanted it to have teeth. We wanted it to be real because we really have these projects that are coming up right now, and we firmly believe it's affordable. That's what I'm trying to get across is, what I'm trying to get across is, I care about my grandkids and they're going to be here, and their kids are going to be here, and they're going to look back and say, these people back then they could have done something about this, and now look what we got. I think this is a very real, horrible problem, and we saw some evidence of this with Caribbean weather this summer. The reason we're up here is because of grandkids and kids, but I still think, having said that, it's affordable. I mean, you can't almost afford not to do it. I mean, you've got to think of what things are going to be like in 20 years and 30 years. We're not going to have a lot of money to spend on aging buildings that are designed to standards from 1989 or something. We have to. We have to do this. We just can't not do it.
The mic, please. No, it's because it records it.
Oh. Getting back to the library a little bit, you said it's not owned by the town, so therefore it would be exempt. But since we would be funding the library renovation, can we not put in some kind of requirement that it be net zero, or?
Well, we're not
because it's
funding
a funny
it. Actually,
thing.
It's
The town
substantially funded through the Massachusetts MLBC, Massachusetts Library. I have that acronym wrong. The bulk of the money would come, if it came, through the state library board.
Mm-hmm.
But we would certainly chunk in. But we, the town of Amherst, would have to put in a lot. I don't know. We had a lot of trouble with this Jones Library decision, and we would have certainly preferred to have the Jones Library be subject to this regulation. It's a big project, and I think it's doable. But there is the problem of how do we account for it. It's accounted for differently, because if the town of Amherst, for instance, my graph up there doesn't make sense. If the town of Amherst is contributing the delta to go from ordinary building to zero energy building, they have no income source to balance against it in the way that other people would, because the income source accrues to the library. And so, it's all us together, but still the library corporation is separate from from the town of Amherst. I don't know. It was a hard decision. Thank you all.
Any more questions for Mr. Havitz? You all understand everything you want to about the marijuana issues?
Yes, I don't know if this is a question for Rob or for you, Jeff, but what's the analogous, the provision that they have to be 300 feet apart in the zoning between retail establishments? Do we have an analogous provision for alcohol licensed retail or bars or whatever? Or why is that? I mean, I can see a reverse logic of, if they're all concentrated, maybe that's a good thing. What was the thinking? I understand it with a school or some of the other exceptions, but why between retail establishments not owned by the same owner?
There isn't anything analogous to that buffer for alcohol or other kinds of things. That number came from when the state legalized medical marijuana a few years ago. The state promulgated some model regulations that included buffers around medical marijuana establishments. The sample regulations called for 500-foot buffers, and when we proposed it to the town, we reduced it to 300. When we were creating the use category for retail use, we wanted to basically keep the standards and conditions basically the same, and not make a lot of changes right now. Keep them the same, and so that's where the 300 came from.
The medical marijuana has the same 300-foot buffer between medical marijuana establishments?
That's right.
Well, I have a quick question. And you had mentioned putting these facilities in multiple use buildings. And what immediately came to mind is the pseudo dormitory on Kendrick Corner, where Triangle Street. That's considered a multiple use building, and it's probably 98% students. And so that was just touched on, and I was running around with the mic, so I don't know where you stand on that. I'd be very concerned.
So the planning board thought that there was no good reason to exclude the sale of a legal product from a mixed-use building. No other legal products are excluded from mixed-use building. So, and including a restriction against mixed-use buildings limits an already small number of places where these establishments can go. So we thought it was, and also since they are already, or they would already be allowed right next door to a mixed-use building, like right next door to it, there's no reason why they couldn't go on top or underneath, in our opinion.
Jeff, what has happened with other communities that were getting ready for this or have found new problems?
Some communities have banned. Are you talking about in Massachusetts or nationwide?
Nationwide, even.
It varies from community to community. I talked to a planning and economic development person from Pueblo County, Colorado. They focused on not retail sales, but just strictly cultivation. And there's articles in the local newspaper saying the tax revenue that we're getting are all our streets. We have no potholes. You know, we're solving our education funding gap, and we don't have significant amount of sales in town. Then you go just north to Denver, and you hear about the Green Mile, where there are 12 establishments within a single mile on a single street, and people have different reactions to that as well. So I think it depends on the community. Within Massachusetts, several communities have initiated outright bans. About a third of the communities, maybe a little less, a quarter, have put in place temporary moratoriums because they don't know what's going on. So it really depends on the community. It depends on how they voted on the ballot question, how easy it is to pass a ban. But I think that a lot of communities are struggling, and I think that actually we're in a really good place because of this internal working group that is focused on it. I mean, I've heard stories from other communities and newspaper articles where their select board or their town meeting are saying, hey, we don't have to deal with this now because they can't open it until July anyway, which is true. They can't open in July, but if somebody applies for that town in April, they're going to say there's no zoning on the books, so you can go wherever you want. So I think that we're in a pretty good place.
What about taxes? Have other places done much to get taxes there?
So the 3% is the maximum that the legislation allows. They also require host community agreements. The community benefit. I'm sorry? A host community agreement is a required agreement between a medical dispensary or a recreational establishment, I guess for that matter, cultivation facility, manufacturer, with the locality where they're in, saying we understand that there are going to be some impact on the town. We will provide some sort of remuneration for those impacts. And for host community agreements, again, that's capped at 3%, and the municipality has to keep track of their expenses related to that use. And that, so if you don't have 3% of their revenue tracked, then you get whatever reimbursement, basically.
One more question.
Will the 3% go into the general fund, or will it be used for our roads or our schools or police or something?
For the tax revenue or the host community agreement, I believe they're both going into the general fund, is my understanding.
Okay, we're after 9 o'clock, so I want to thank everyone who took time to come and explain articles, and always we're so grateful to have Amherst Media, which does so much to keep Amherst residents informed. This program will be rebroadcast a lot of times, so if you want to hear it again or tell others. Everyone is invited to what we're now calling warrant discussions that will be held in different parts of town at different times and places to make it easier for people to attend. And these give people a chance to discuss articles informally and with other residents. There'll be 4 of these meetings. Thursday, the 26th, from 7 to 9 at the UMass Police Station. That's up on East Pleasant, across from campus. Monday, October 30th, from 7 to 9 at the middle school room that's north of the cafeteria. We always put up a bunch of signs to help people find that room. And Thursday, November 2nd, 7 to 9, Crocker Farm School Library. Saturday, November 4th, 2 to 4 p.m., if someone would like to go in the afternoon, at the town police station in the community room. There's not going to be a bus tour this year because there were no sights really much to see. And do fill out and your evaluation form, because we like to see how those went. And thank you and good night.